Hello, and welcome to Replay Value. If you were to ask me what the most important episode in any series was, I would say that it would have to be the first. It's the opening that has the important job of establishing tone, themes, characters, plot, and maybe most importantly, to give the audience something to hook onto so that they'll come back for more. It's not that the journey nor the destination aren't critical to my overall enjoyment, but if the first impression doesn't go well, I'll probably be getting off the ride early, ignorant to what comes after. It should come as no surprise then when I say most of my favorite shows have incredibly strong first episodes. And not to be bested by Hyoko, where I talked about how great its first half was, this time we'll be taking this concept even further to talk about how in 1 minute, Steins Gate not only established more than most series manage in 22, but also how elegantly it did so. Steins Gate is both subtle and over the top in how it builds its atmosphere through its visual and audio production in this opening minute. The first half is a jumbled mess of interspersed images, static and compression effects, and double exposures. Images show up for mere frames before being discarded or melting into the next one, those shots being anything from signs in a city to text on screens to bikes on a rack. These images are striking in how they suddenly appear on screen or how they're filtered, being the flashes of color on a white and black background, but they're never around long enough to leave a sharp impression, just a sense of one. And that means that foreshadowing images can be snuck in there, where they'll have zero sticking power in the viewer's consciousness, but will be mulling around subconsciously, giving later callbacks a sense of inevitability, or maybe déjà vu. Something impossible to place where it's been seen before, but they're all the same. All the while, the core image, the telephone pole and its wiring, is shot by a camera that weaves, bobs, and spins seemingly at random around it. That's not even to speak of the sonic profile of this sequence. Rolling adding machines, the tick of a clock, a painful beeping sound. None of it is in lockstep. The tick is the continuous audio element, giving the sequence a metronome effect that you can choose to follow along with. But it's constantly in competition by the evolving volume and layered clicking of the machines. The whole sequence is information overload, both visually and sonically, and that's not even talking about the soliloquy that Okabe goes on over top all of this. It's intentionally like this. There's too much to process, so you can only take in bits and pieces of the material that isn't the spoken dialogue. And the rest of it leaves you off balance, like there's stuff going on that you can't really understand and is beyond your control. The second half is the exact opposite of this. It's almost barren of visual information. The images are so washed out that the whites are almost painfully bright and color is still a rarity. Our first look at the speaker is him lost in the static and film compression until it focus pulls where we can see him. With that right side aligned focus, our eyes don't even have to move as suddenly our center column is emptied out, going from mostly black to pure white, as the sky is barren in a way that makes the shadows on Okabe even more striking. The shots themselves are mostly still angular to give a sense of off balance, but that quickly transitions away from Dutch angles to level images as Mayuri calls out to Okabe and we see his face properly from her perspective, and invert that for hers. Also, this shot where Okabe turns out of frame to reveal Mayuri's legs while also setting up a camera move in that same direction is just beautiful. We also get to see that the sky is a proper blue, albeit oversaturated, but that doesn't mean that the sun isn't overwhelming. As when Mayuri reaches her hand out towards the sun, she's overtaken by its luminescence as though she's being absorbed by it. That fade to white is also the transition to the title card, which is just so simple and clean. The second half is focused on making the summer feel like an oppressive, shackling climate, with the cicadas in the background adding to the chaotic nature, but an ever-present and cliché way to tell us of the season. If the first half was impossible to parse visually, this half is all too easy to understand with the sterile backgrounds and the simple color palette. That's not to say that the sequence doesn't have depth or striking visual moments. The nature of the shadows, the way that most of the shots are medium or tight, the off-balance nature before leveling thanks to Mayuri's presence, Okabe's initial full shot, and Mayuri's reach into the sun, a white hot ball and its radiance that commands the sequence. All of that is purely from how the show looks and sounds, and to say nothing about the words being spoken or what meaning we can apply to these characters, or how it starts to introduce the themes of the show or the motifs it sets up. So let's do the soliloquy first, as that's the last bit of content, and then we'll cross our T's once we have everything on the table. The Japanese version is a compression and tweaking of the VN's intro quote. Despite losing the lines about fish and light speed, most of the original meaning is still there, at least the most important bits, which are the final two lines.
英知を持つ者こそ最も愚かであることは歴史からも読み取れる。
Here, Okabe is speaking to a Socratic ideology, specifically that those who believe themselves to be knowledgeable are fooling themselves, though he doesn't go so far as to claim that he knows nothing and therefore is truly wise. Claiming knowledge and trying to exercise said knowledge is asking for destruction, and that's in the final line.
これは抗える者たちに対する神からの最後通告と言えよ。
This line is kinda just a throw in without the context of the VN quote, specifically regarding how a fish living on land is more plausible than a man exceeding light speed, which makes clear that the rebelling act is an attempt to go against God's rules, the natural order. Without that specific VN knowledge, though, the final line still mostly works, specifically in that history is the warning, though we're not sure what the history is, and to try to seek out wisdom is the rebellious element. Stars would seem to be an allusion to this desire to gain knowledge, then, as they are by their own power destroyed, leaving the universe, in its permanence, equivalent with natural law or God, never to be defeated, ended, or bridled. The Japanese version, despite not being as encompassing as the VN's intro, gives a clear indication of the scale of the story and a clear thematic conflict. The major contrast from the Japanese to the English version is going from a universe that is infinite, as stated by Okabe, to the declaration that Okabe thinks that the universe is likely finite. It has a beginning, everything within it has an ending, therefore it must be finite. This is our benchmark for the character. This is what he believes before the events of the show actually happen. But most interestingly, the face of the speech is undercut by the final line.
We're all just a ship of fools chasing phantoms, heedless of what really underwrites natural law.
That final line is saying that scientists are focused on ethereal aspects of fundamental truths, and that they have no idea what's really happening, which is exactly what Okabe is doing in his opening line by focusing on the shadows of the whole, the parts, but not the entirety. It's not hypocritical, it's just proof that as much as Okabe is aware of this tendency, he too is guilty of it, poking at phantoms while unaware of the undercurrent. He is a fool as much as anyone else, especially since by not thinking the universe is infinite, that means that it could be tamed, at least by comparing the two versions of the Soliloquy. And in a similar vein, my favorite line in the bunch is,
Splitting hairs or not, if history tells us anything, it's that scientists often make very poor poets.
It's my favorite because of how much it says about Okabe's character, especially when you consider that this line is immediately followed by the line which is stated in the most poetic way possible. It works on multiple levels. First, it confirms that Okabe considers himself a scientist, but not on the same level as the Platonic ideal of a scientist, since by attempting the dramatic flair, he's presenting as different to the average. But it's kind of a win-win for him, since if it sticks, he's the exception, and if it fails, he's proving his own point. You can also read it as arrogance, saying that he's different from this group that he's claiming membership of, all the while similarly having no idea of the truth of the matters at hand. If Okabe is speaking as a scientist in his opening line, and later by the splitting hairs line contrast, suggests that poets are more clearly able to speak to the whole, even if they too don't understand how the specifics work, he's putting himself forward as both in this moment. But if he's wrong, it would suggest that he's neither. Alright. That's a heavy reading of an opening speech that probably has as much meaning as any of Okabe's operation titles in it, but I think the core points are clear in that it gives us a baseline for Okabe's character, sets up for later callbacks, and hinting at one of the major thematic conflicts in the show. The first major theme that this opening minute introduces is that the forces at play in the show are not to be treated lightly, specifically natural law. The embodiment of nature, the sun, is an oppressive force in this sequence. And when combined with the close-up shots and the way that the color palette is totally washed out, its effects can't be missed on practically every shot in this sequence. And that's why the first half of the sequence is the way it is. The absolute overload of information is the embodiment of how there's just too much to understand and process, and that obscures the truth. You can't understand natural law. No one can. It's deliberately impossible to understand. That also gets us into some of the motifs, because the natural law we're dealing with in this story is time. And what's a better way to visually represent the understanding of time that Steins is working with than wires running parallel and coiling around each other? The ticking clock is also a pretty good hint that time is the core concept we're working with here. We also learn how important Mayuri is, able to stabilize the angled shots with her presence, an indication of how she's special to Okabe. We're also introduced to her personality briefly through her reaching towards the sun, a visual callback for later. In addition, there's several elements of foreshadowing hidden in plain sight throughout the opening sequence, and plenty of material to call back to later in the show from Okabe's soliloquy. All of this, and more frankly that I'll get to as it relates to the rest of the first episode in the next video, is done with masterful direction, clever sound design, and an extremely well thought out opening speech. Next time on Operation Yggdrasil, we'll be taking a look at the second minute. Just kidding. We'll be talking about the first episode in its entirety proper, combining some of the things that we established here and how they empower the rest of the episode, and really laying the groundwork for one of the most well-constructed first episodes from a structural level in anime history. But until next time, L. Sci. Congru.